So, hi everyone. My name is Mike Ellicock. I'm Chief Executive of National Numeracy. And now with me, I've got Rob Eastaway. He's the Director of Maths Inspiration. And we're going to have a quick chat about why the exact answer doesn't always matter. So over to Rob. Could you just introduce yourself and then we'll get going?
Hello, Mike. Yeah. So you just mentioned I'm Director of Maths Inspiration. What I spend my life doing is trying to communicate about maths and get people engaged with maths and see how it's relevant to their lives and how it can be enjoyable sides of it. So Maths Inspiration, what these are actually are theatre-based lecture shows to do an interactive lecture show for teenagers, 16, 17-year-olds, to show them that maths can relate to their future careers, and there are some bits of it that are quite intriguing and exciting, maybe not like their experience at home. So that's one side of what I do. And then the other side is I write about maths. I've written about 10, 12 books on my own or with other people about maths, and often the maths of everyday life and how to see the link between maths and the real world.
Yeah. No, well, that's great. And on the link between maths and the real world, it would be remiss of me not to recall your conversation that we had, that actually incredibly helpfully, probably about 9 years ago. So I was starting to think about whether a new organisation needed to be created to focus on the kind of things that National Numeracy now focus on.
My view has changed a lot, and I see, and it will come up maybe as we're talking now, that very big difference between maths and numeracy, or at least they have a lot in common, but numeracy is a very particular and very important part that maybe is sometimes neglected in the talk about maths, what maths actually means. So I think it's been helpful to have that word emphasized.
Yeah, and certainly from my perspective as I came into it, I think a lot of the organizations out there are very much maths organizations, and they're people who love maths and they want to share that love of maths, and I think that's great. I think my position, as we started National Numeracy, and I think what we try to create is not so much that we're maths advocates as such, but we're about thinking about how we can best enable everybody to use numbers and data, to make good decisions in their daily life. And the thing that became apparent very early is this whole thing about confidence. Would you like to just reflect on that in terms of your work, especially, your books for maths for our mums and dads and that kind of thing?
Yeah, and actually, how did I get into doing books in the first place? Because in a way, that's what opened out everything else. And I actually started in my maths history is in puzzle setting. I used to, I kind of got really into puzzles as a teenager, and I started setting them. I started setting them for New Scientist magazine and the Sunday Times, quite young. And I loved doing that. That was a playful side of maths. But after a while, you start realizing the thing about puzzles is it's kind of there to trick people and for people to get stuck and get things wrong. And it can almost be a bit of an alienating thing for those people who say, well, I can't do this. It makes me feel stupid. And I actually don't like creating that feeling. I like things to be inclusive. So I began switching across to wanting to explain how things work and make it accessible, and understanding a lot more the attitude of the people who say, well, you might think it's fun. I don't think it's fun. I don't get it. A colleague of mine, Mike Askew, wonderful maths expert. He's a professor in maths education. He and I together wrote Maths for Mums and Dads. And that gave me a much better understanding of not only why children get it wrong, but why many of us get things wrong in maths and find things difficult and so on. So that was a bit of a revelation for me. And that book has probably been, the most satisfying project I've done, for feeling that it's helped a lot of people out there to feel more confident, that they understand, well, the way maths is being done now, but also that the way that they do maths themselves might be actually okay.
Yeah. No, I think there's a huge amount in that. And I think, one of the things that we've, I can't remember whose phrase it was originally, but this thing about in the real world, what we need to be able to do often is quite simple maths, but in complex situations. And what happens, for me as well, my eldest is in the kind of GCSE year now. I can't do the maths immediately that she's doing now at GCSE. I like to think I could apply my brain to it and work my way through it eventually, take a while. But the school maths, especially as you drift into secondary school, is this ever more complex maths in very simple situations, and it creates this impression. Well, one, it's difficult to recall it, and you never really need to apply it in daily life, most of it. But also this kind of thing about the right answer, that we have this obsession that the right and wrong, and lots of people really like that. And of course, when you're doing the calculation, it is about finding the right answer. But in the real world, most of the problems that we're trying to solve don't have a right answer. Ever more, the really live one now, of course, is the mathematical modelling to do with the virus spread, and depending upon what the inputs are, you get very different outputs. So yeah, I'd just like you to reflect on that, and this thing about that fear of the right answer, and how much of school maths is dominated by that.
Yeah, well, why is it that so many people feel so anxious about maths? It is that I think the fear of getting it wrong, in public in particular, is a massive one. And I am no different. I hate, the thought when I'm put on the spot with a maths question, an arithmetic question, thinking, if I get it wrong, what will they think of me? And so we're all the same in that respect.
I've been doing National Numeracy for 8 years, and I'm passing the baton at the end of June. But I've done a lot of radio interviews, as you have. When we launched Stardust Studios, you did a great piece with 5 Live. But the number of times, it's a lot of times, probably not half the interviews, but something a bit under that, where I get asked a times table question. And I'm trying to explain it's half of adults at primary school levels. We've got a real issue with maths confidence and fear, and we're trying to help people overcome that. And then there's this kind of enthusiasm to put me on the spot. And I just try and think, if I was talking about the same thing for literacy, that there's lots of people who struggle to read, and we're trying to help them. I don't think they'd be asking me to spell a word. It's a very strange relationship we have with maths. This whole thing about getting the right answer and for times tables or something like that, there clearly is a right answer. But and it is useful to know number bonds and times tables, because it helps you to estimate. And I think that's one of the big things in your latest book, Maths on the Back of an Envelope. So it'd be really good. And you've got a phrase in there, Z-equals, which I really like. It might be fun to explain to people what that's all about.
Yeah, well, you mentioned, rough numbers in the new, numbers aren't very precise, and we're surrounded at the moment with statistics, government statistics, forecasts, and we know one thing we can guarantee is they're all wrong. That but sometimes very annoying that those forecasts are very precise. House prices will go down by 16%, said one report in the news the other day. I'm thinking, yeah, right, 16% or 25% or 3%. That 16 implies we know and we don't. So I get annoyed by when we hear stats quoted to lots of significant figures or decimal places when we can't justify that. But when we do hear numbers, I think the important thing is to be able to say, does that make sense? Yeah. And making sense means, look, is it about right? So, if someone says 1,764, so about 2,000, does that sound right? Or is it out by a factor of 10? So I think one of the most important numeracy skills is to be able to look at a number and say, is that about right? So I invented, it's a fun sounding concept, but it's a very serious idea behind it, a thing called Z-equals. And the idea of Z-equals is, in doing any calculation, before you do anything else, you reduce the number you're dealing with to one significant figure, i.e. you round it to the nearest 100 or the nearest 10 or the nearest unit or whatever. And let me give you an example of that. Supposing I said, how many hours are there in a year?
You're not allowed to put me on the spot, Rob.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I'm floating this out in a nice general. I should have
remembered that one.
And he said, well, there's 24 hours in a day, 365 days in a year, 366 this year probably. But I'm going to use a calculator for that. It's unlikely we're going to need to know 24 times 3. We use a calculator to things like that. But what is it about? Is it about 1 million, 10 million, or whatever? Well, using the Z-equals approach, you can reduce it to something you can do in your head. So there's 24 hours in a day, 24 Z-equals 20. So let's call it 20, close enough. 365 days in a year. Well, that equals 400. It's not far off. So what's 20 times 400? Well, 2 times 400 is 800. Add the other 0, 8,000. Okay, now I don't know what the correct answer is. I have not looked it up. It's 8,000 something. But frankly, 8,000 or about 10,000, I think it would be great in a fantasy world if people left school able to do equals. Alas, it's not in the curriculum. It's very hard to do 24 times 365, but it's not beyond the wits of most people to do 20 times 400. Certainly 2 times 4, and then how many zeros to add at the end. You can remind yourself with practice how to do that.
I think a really important message that we need to get across to kids, but also to parents and to adults in terms of when they're looking at numbers and data in their daily life, is that when you get that rabbit in a headlights thing, you don't need to spit out an answer straight away. You don't actually need an exact answer often. The 17 times 24, it's about 20 times 20. That's 400. It's about 400. Then get your phone out. And I think it's 408 is the actual answer. It's one of the ones I've memorized. but this kind of, we often use the word number sense, being comfortable with numbers. Does that number look right? And I don't think the school mathematics does a good job of that.
In defence of school maths, it's got much more problem-solving based, and arithmetic in primary school has got much higher priority and so on. And there is a new qualification called core maths, which is very much addressing this, and it perhaps doesn't get as much publicity as it deserves. So you go into sixth form, and you don't want to do A-level maths, but you want to keep on doing maths. What core maths is about interpreting statistics and doing rough estimates, all these things that are actually incredibly prized skills. So I do suggest, either those who are watching this, or you might have children who are wondering what to do about maths, to look at core maths and see that and be impressed at, wow, actually, this looks really useful.
I mean, I think it's nuts. We're a global outlier. For people to be able to, or kids to be able to, potentially scrape through that GCSE, learn some stuff, just get past that threshold, a pass mark of being in the top 2/3 of the cohort, and then they can give it up forever, and they can take this kind of arts course or whatever. We need to prepare everybody to be able to use numbers and data in daily life. I think core maths is a fantastic approach. It's level 3, so it's for people who passed GCSE, and we often think that what we're trying to provide with the National Numeracy Challenge is like core maths at level 2.
Yes.
And I think the message we're trying to get across, and I think your books kind of really help with it, is actually that if you do engage with this stuff, particularly like in the parent relationship, you don't have to be the teacher pouring knowledge into your child's head. It's much better if they can teach you. And
Absolutely. And you do it together, you investigate together. I mean, I love that approach about maths not being about homework, but it's about just doing stuff, doing life with your child. And when you're cooking, shopping, standing in a queue, whatever, you kind of explore and you wonder, rather than saying, okay, so how many eggs are there in that? Don't make it into a test. Make it into I wonder how many eggs there are in that.
Absolutely. And I know you're doing some top tips for parents as well.
I am. That's it.
Looking forward to seeing whether I've got them nailed yet. So, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much for supporting the day. I think your work around maths inspiration is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
And it's been great to work with you.
And with you, Mike. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.